morning, good afternoon, and possibly good evening. Welcome to the second episode of our Build to Rent Network, our home team edition. Today, we have Tim and Jasmine, who are both two of our local district managers here in Florida. And we're going to talk about three different articles, go through the details of them, and then share our own unique opinions. Tim, we're going to go ahead and start with you. You have an article talking about the three types of homes to buy during this summer. Can you walk us through the article?
Yeah, thanks, Alvin. So, three types of homes. We are in the midst of summer 2024, interest rates, the Fed, everything we're reading in the headlines. As I tell my investors, there's always a strategy to win as long as you have a strategy. And this is just kind of breaking down three spots right now where we should be looking. And one of the reasons I like this article is I think kind of one to two of them really hit at what Build to Rent is focused on. So the three types of homes that this article on Yahoo Finance talks about is, starter homes, multifamily properties, and distressed properties. I think where I'm not as focused on, and maybe we're not as focused on distressed properties, there's probably a strategy there to win if that's the game you play. But when I think about starter homes and multifamily homes, with all the challenges in real estate for so many people right now, multifamily properties are a great avenue, even for people looking to buy a home to live in. Just looking at a primary residence, there's some strategies, and we talk about this a lot, and I talk about it with my investors a lot, where, an owner-occupied multifamily investment property is a great solution right now to kind of offset some of the challenges maybe with available capital for a down payment, some of the challenges with interest rates, and then also the opportunity for you to get actively involved in real estate investment while also finding a place for yourself to live. So, duplexes, triplexes, some of the quads that we have in our inventory are very attractive for both renting and then also holding, potentially refining down the road, and then later selling. And right now, it's really just a matter of where do you live, where are you looking, and how can you employ kind of a multifamily search strategy concurrently to maybe your single family strategy to find different opportunities and more creative solutions to get into homes. As I really think about, buyer's market, seller's market doesn't really matter. What matters is your strategy. And I know, Jasmine and I spend a lot of time talking about strategy with our investors and making sure we have a sound approach to how we're going to, both solve some of their problems, but then also help them achieve their goals on investing. So I found this article, interesting just because summer of 2024, I think going into summer 2024, a lot of real estate professionals and investment professionals were saying, okay, this is going to be a strong summer. And I still think it is, but there's always going to be these challenges that we need to find these active solutions for. And I think these were three great options for your consideration.
Yeah, Tim, thanks for sharing. One of the things that stood out to me is just we've seen the trend moving away from these larger big cities, and the article seems to suggest, going to some of the smaller ones. So a lot of capital flight, a lot of people leaving cities like New York, San Francisco. You also have a lot greater competition, right? A lot bigger, deeper pockets are in those markets as well. So there's a lot of approach of going to these secondary markets. One of the things that's interesting is that this has been a trend that we've been seeing for, almost I shouldn't even say a trend. It's been a continuation, but it really peaked during COVID. And what we're not hearing is we're not saying that, hey, returning to those markets makes sense now, right? So they're not saying, hey, now it's time to go. And those big cities are the ones that are hurting the most right now, and it's still seen as a no-go zone. Still seen. So and then when we look at these secondary cities, they do list a couple of them here as well. They mentioned Scottsdale, Tampa, Salt Lake, Columbus, and Austin. I wouldn't think of those as small cities. To me, those are still the areas where they're next in line, but they're not affordable. They're not really cheaper. They're not really the ones that are going to provide the best performance. They are going to help from a employment standpoint, but it's not going to be a huge relief compared to those major cities. And so we actually like to find areas that are just adjacent to some of these. So like one of the cities on the list is a city like Tampa, where you say, okay, how do I, take advantage of everything Tampa has to offer? But Tampa's expanding beyond its natural borders, and that growth is now affecting other regions nearby. Those other regions nearby are the ones that are going to have the biggest growth potential. There's going to be a lot more development there. I'm going to be paying a discount because the land cost is a lot cheaper, but they will eventually be absorbed, and they're not going to deal with a lot of the challenges that some of these urban centers have. But with the downsides of them, so it's almost a little bit of a refuge, but you still take advantage of the big economic factors. They mentioned buying foreclosed homes. I'm not sure why. We're not seeing a lot of options there. And so it doesn't make sense to chase after something that doesn't really exist. So there isn't options in the foreclosure area. I don't know why the article mentioned that. Jasmine, I don't know if you had any thoughts. I know that you also work with a lot of rehabbers. Have you seen anything on the foreclosure side that would make that appealing?
I actually chuckled a little bit when you said that because you're exactly right. And it's funny because I think just in general, the overall strategy is like, hey, here's a general solution for this. But it's not really something that's going to be really relevant to what we're doing today. So yes, I do work with a good amount of, in the past, flippers, rehabbers. So my specialty is working with investors primarily, and as Tim mentioned, you spend a lot of time going over the strategy. Especially because a good amount of my investors, when I first started, were first-time investors or beginner investors. So we talk about how are we getting to the end goal, which is, building a legacy for yourself and profitability. And one of the first questions I always get is, can you get me a list of foreclosures? Like, sure, let me just go ahead and get back to 2008, 2000. I'd be happy to do that. So something that is, that I always make people aware of is that we are not in a market where we're seeing a lot of foreclosures. We see a lot of the hoopla on the media about, the housing market crash and all these things are coming. And I always have to to make it very simple. The housing market crash was a mortgage crash. It had nothing to do, mortgage industry crash had nothing to do with the actual properties. Since then, the regulations have been tightened. They've been refined in order to protect consumers, to protect the banks, and protect our economy. And so even though we have all of these changes that have happened since COVID, the likelihood of a crash and all these numbers of foreclosures that these articles are recommending, they just don't exist. So, the same way I think consumers have this perception that it's just more difficult for them to find, or there's some type of gatekeeping. Now, granted, after COVID, there was a slight increase. And this is just from my personal experience from working in the Florida market, working with rehabbers and flippers who are typically looking for properties to purchase at very low entry points. And what they found, and what we all found, is that those numbers, those ideal kind of make-believe numbers that they were looking for, they just didn't exist. People can't afford their mortgages, whether or not they want to keep them. It's a completely different story. But at the end of the day, in the current market, we're not seeing a lot of foreclosures. And that's a good thing, right? So I know on the investor side, a lot of times we tend to want to look for properties that we can get into very cheaply. But at the end of the day, if you could get into that property really cheaply, and so could the neighbor and that neighbor and all of these other properties, what does that do for your long-term equity and your overall gain? So that is why a lot of my flippers and rehabbers are now asking me, hey, what can I do in this market?
That's true, Tim. Then they also mentioned a lot of the multifamily, which I like multifamily, especially with the new changes that we have now with Fannie and Freddie allowing you to put just 5% down into properties for someone to start out to live in a unit, rent the other one out. Now, you're not going to live in it for free, but you may potentially reduce your housing expenses overall. and then you can move out after a year. The other thing about multifamily, which I like, is you're targeting a much lower rental rate, which regardless of how you feel about the future outlook of our economy, however, whether you're bullish or bearish, it's you target a lower rental rate and more people can qualify to rent that at that price point. But Tim, I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on just duplexes as a whole and kind of why that's a potential good strategy for this summer.
I mean, I think when you look at, duplexes and triplexes, the opportunity to invest in those, I mean, it's just like any business. I mean, the opportunity to invest in more revenue streams is advantageous versus a singular revenue stream. So, there's some great pro formas that we have out there that we're working through on single families, but I'm always going to advocate for multiple revenue streams coming in that appreciates at a rate for multiple revenue streams over singular. So, that's the multifamily piece of it where, maybe there's fewer multifamily homes being built, but that really doesn't matter to investors when you work with a group that specializes in connecting builders that specialize in this very construction focused strategy. So that's where I'm really focused on. The more revenue streams, the more income streams, the better for an investor.
And it's also a lot easier, right? So it's easier when you have one mortgage, one loan attached to a property. And you're not like when you start going up with volumes with the properties you have, just sometimes memorizing who's the insurance provider for that property is like you have to go and
Right.
dig to see who that person is. So just getting more units per mortgage, just having just more doors under one roof, just kind of simplifying your life is obtainable by going to more units. Now, Jasmine, I do want to go to your next article. And so we're finding that for me, I used to be a flipper. Flipping has been dead for about 5 years, but there are a lot of type A personality people who kept doing it and they find the way to survive. But now we're at the point where the market's not going to save you, right? We don't know what future prices are going to hold. They could be flat. They could go up slightly. We're about 5% up this year, but definitely we know for sure the buyer demand isn't there. So a lot of flippers are now stuck with properties and they don't know what to do. And so your article talks specifically about that. Can you give us more insight on that?
Yeah, for sure. I am going to argue about the flipping being dead for the last 5 years, but not too much because you have a little bit of a point. Luckily, I won't say luckily, there's a lot of hard work that goes into it. The last 5 years have been pretty good for my focus. But now I am getting the calls of, hey, what do I do now? And so what we're finding and what led me to want to dive a little bit more into this article, it came from real life experience. I'm getting calls from investors that are saying, hey, I have these properties that I started working on. I purchased them in, 2022 or 2023 when the money was really cheap. And the properties where, maybe it was a good find and needed a lot of work. And because there was more demand, buyers just weren't looking for those property in buyers. And so it was relatively easy for us to negotiate to get good deals on these properties that they could flip. If you do not flip them very quickly and get out of those properties, sell them for a profit during that time where the buyer demand was very high, well, now I'm getting calls from other flippers who may not have been people that I work with directly and saying, hey, I know that this is something that you are actively working in, that you're an expert in. How can I get out of these properties? Because what happened is that when the interest rates began to rise, it wasn't necessarily people didn't want to buy homes anymore. It's that for the average person, it didn't make sense anymore. That house that they were looking at that was 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, a year or so ago when they were just kind of shut down, but they couldn't get into it because they were starting being offers. And they figured, oh, I'll wait, until some of those buyers back in the market. Well, now you're at a point where financially it doesn't make sense anymore. And so the rehabbers and the flippers who purchased those properties with the intent of selling to the buyers who were making 10, 11, 12 offers on the property still have those properties, because the buyers don't want to pay the mortgage that is associated with the value. Not to say that the value isn't there. So there's, I think, a misconception that, the purchase prices are going to come down. They're going to just shoot down because nobody wants to buy properties. And that's not the case. The case is that buyers are being a lot more picky about the properties that they're choosing because it's stretching their pockets a little bit more. And so flippers are having to wait a lot longer. Whereas before, if I was working with a rehabber who had purchased a property and were ready to put it on the market, I'm like, oh, a day and a half to be under contract. Now we're looking at days on market, 40 days, 60 days, 120 days. Do you have the ability to hold on to that property for 6, 7, 8, 9 months in order to get the profit that you're looking for? And the reality is that a lot of rehabbers and flippers don't. And so what this article talks about is how to get out of those flips. And it makes a couple of suggestions, on how to basically have an exit strategy. And I saw it just because of the fact that these are real conversations that I'm having. Now, the article basically says that, hey, there are a couple things that you can do. You can work harder to sell. Jazz it up, put some streamers out there and, boost it on, boost it online and all these things, pay more to make the property get to more people, right? But I don't know how that's going to help if people are still paying $1,000 more for it, but that's what the ad says. Or it says, cut your losses, drop the list price. That's what buyers are waiting for. Go ahead and just cut out that profit, lower the profit margins that you were looking for, expect that you're going to get less, go ahead and get the property sold. That does work. It does. If you drop the price, obviously, if I list a house for $1, somebody's going to buy it. It doesn't matter what it looks like. But a lot of times, the money has already been invested and those profit margins are not very high. So that's likely not something that they are looking to do, which is why they're calling me to say, what's my other option? And then we have another that the third option that they talk about is turning that property into a rental. Turning the property into a rental, using the equity so that you have a long-term gain. This article, I chose it just simply because I know that it's a question that is coming up a lot from people who are used to being rehabbers and flippers. And I know other real estate professionals are probably hearing the same questions. But the reality of it is that there's a perspective change that's because flippers and rehabbers and investors in general are realizing that, hey, I can't play the short game. There's a certain market when you can go out and look for those properties where you're going to put in the funds and you're going to flip it and sell it in 6 to 12 months or 6 to 9 months. But the reality is we're really looking at long-term. If you're looking to invest, you're looking at the long-term goal. And that is actually why I love what we do with Build to Rent. Because Build to Rent brings the solution. You have the ability to purchase the properties going in it. You still have the equity. A lot of times, the equity is really the same or maybe even more than what they would have, the rehabber or flipper would have profited at the end of the day. And a lot of times when a rehabber or a flipper looks at their profit, they're looking at list price, rehab costs, what I sold it for. Okay, well, what about their set of closing costs when you sold it? Insurance. What about your holding costs? What about that, the electrical system that you had to replace that you thought you just had to replace the panel? What about the loan that you had to extend, that cost you $10,000 additional? There is no profit on that times, especially in this. And so while some rehabbers or flippers may have the ability to go in and do a DSCR loan or refinance, they may or may not have the room to be able to do that, honestly, in this market. So Build to Rent to me, I love the way that we approach it because of the fact that we go into the problem with the solution already, which is to go into your investment looking at the long-term end game. You're looking at long-term equity. We're investing in places that are in highly appreciating areas. We have attractive rent and a brand new product. You're not going to have to worry about replacing that electrical system in 10 to 15 years. And we also have the one thing that almost in any other market or any other system, any other solution typically doesn't have, which is that you also go into the property with equity, which is really what investors are looking for.
Yeah, Tim.
Jasmine, when you sent this article, I love it because I think you can substitute flip for, a lot of what I do in like STR. You could sub flip for STR. You could sub flip for small business. I mean, the reality is our responsibility as consultants and advisors is oftentimes, the mistakes have already been made by the time they get to us, right? Like there's been a flaw in the strategy by the time it comes to us. And our job is to identify that, adjust and adapt, and make sure that we're working with someone who is open to doing that. I think we see it oftentimes where, we work together to, rejigger the solution, and the person on the other end doesn't really want to change they want the result without changing the effort or changing the strategy. And that kind of, again, harkens back to, our strategy is so much about at the very front of, before you enter the transaction, we're going to make sure we have solid fundamentals going into it. We're going to make sure we understand the intent and the goals of the investor, and then how do we execute that, and how do we match that investor to a property that matches those goals. And I think we get ahead of some of these challenges that people who are saying, hey, I have a flip or an STR or a small business, I can't sell it. Well, okay, you probably weren't marketing it correctly, or you weren't marketing it at all. You priced it way too high. I mean, these things that, we kind of work so much at the front of the relationship building to get ahead of, just kind of protects our investors. But yeah, you're talking about flips, I'm talking about STRs, but I mean, it's the same problem, just in a different vehicle, right?
Talk about pushback. Imagine those flippers and rehabbers that I've been working with for the last 3 to 5 years who've made a lot of money. And I'm now coming to them before the slowdown happened, before the longer days on markets were coming, before the profit margins were starting to tighten, to say, hey, this is the strategy that we need to be looking at. And they're looking at me like, are you crazy? Have you seen how much money we're making?
Right.
But it's because, I'm sure, just like Alvin and just like you, being proactive about thinking about what's coming next. I know that's something that we talk about, even within our team, looking at what's happening in the market and planning 2, 3, 4, 5 years ahead. That's the way that I've always worked with my investors. That's how I ended up at Build to Rent, because I knew that there were going to be some changes that were going to be coming, it was going to be inevitable, right?
Right.
But at the time where my rehabbers and flippers were still really profitable, it was almost impossible to explain to them why Build to Rent was beneficial. Well, now they're following me.
Right.
It's not that hard to see anymore. They're like, hey, what were you saying about that whole long-term equity thing? What were you saying about the dangers of, not getting out of these properties quickly and the interest rates and things? It was something you were saying about, like profit margins being almost nothing. And I'm like, yeah, let's have a conversation about it. So yes, it is very difficult at times to talk, especially when it's someone that you have not just a long-term relationship with, but a profitable relationship with, to say, hey, this is where we're shifting right now. But I think that that's the wonderful thing about our team, is that we have professionals with years of experience in different industries, all able to come together and put together solutions and strategies to really investors.
Yeah, so Jasmine has the flippers, Tim has the STRs. So I'll go with the land developers. You have no idea how many people bought raw land, saying eventually they're going to build on it, not knowing that they're not going to get approved for a construction loan, not knowing that the builder doesn't want to build on it. And so what we're talking about is really two big things. It's one, exit strategies, and are they multiple? So what else can you do with a raw land if you can't build on it? Well, nothing, right? What else can you do with a flip if it's not going to be profitable for you? Nothing. Cut your losses. What are you going to do with an STR that only works as a short-term rental and has no other use, right? These are all things that are short-sighted and they only have one route. And so a lot of times when we talk to our investors, we're talking about, hey, let's go with the safe thing. And then we could be creative on top of that. So for example, if a property you buy works as a long-term rental and you own it for a year or two and you say, you know what, I think I want to do something to make it more appropriate for a short-term rental. Cool. That's an experiment that you're doing, trying to increase your profit margins, but you know on the backside it works for a long-term rental. Same thing when you're doing a flip. When you do a flip, you should almost intend to want to hold on to the property. So when you intend to hold on to the property, you're going to do a better job in rehabbing it, taking care of it. And you know the numbers work if you can't sell it for the optimum number. So you got to do both. But we will definitely say, let's lean into what's consistent. Let's lean into the numbers we know, things we have confidence in, that even if there's a market shift, we can absorb. So there's a long term, we can look at the rental rates. They've only gone up for the last, 50 years. Even when you look at different recessions, that's been pretty consistent. Prices have changed, right? That adjusts. Short-term rental is a newer phenomenon, right? We don't have long-term historical data on that. That's a new thing, and it's a wave that's emerging and a wave that can go away. So we'll definitely say, hey, look at your backside, look at worst-case scenarios, make sure you have multiple exits. And additionally, you got to know that you should stick to the conservative route first and then experiment on top of that. But don't do the experiment first and then hopefully try to find something that works in the back end.
I would call most beginner rehabbers and flippers professional experimenters.
Yeah. And by the way, real quick about flipping is that from 2010 to 2019, there was a lot of properties available that you could flip. And that's kind of what I meant. Not that it was dead for the last 5 years. It got increasingly hard. And now it's extraordinarily difficult to find a property that, and a lot of the things that we're selling is actually cheaper than on market properties. So, we're actively undercutting what that future, flipper is going to try to sell that property for, is we're going to be cheaper than that price point. So that makes it even more harder when someone like us is providing product that's actually cheaper than what they're trying to get for it.
And a lot of those challenges too on the offloading of properties, you factor in something that so many people employ, which is the 1031 exchange. Trying to look for properties right now on that tight time frame that you have to find a property and get under contract on. That's another just opportunity here with working with a group that's got this inventory of cash flowing properties. We've done the work on the analysis, the pro formas. We work to match your strategic investment strategy with opportunities that maybe we have access to, makes that 1031. I was talking to a real estate lawyer earlier this week, and just they were like, wait, yeah, this is super. Yeah, we can totally do this for a 1031 exchange. This is almost seamless. Like the ability to streamline this for so many of these real estate investors that I know, they would jump at the opportunity. They just have to know about it.
Right. And I can tell you, Tim, another, sector, another individual that it's really seemed to work for, a good amount of my investors are also business owners. And I see a lot of them have just literally been drained by these last few profitable years of flipping and rehab. And they're like, I know that I can continue to do this, but I don't want to. I am tired. It took a lot of hard work for me to be able to do this. And so when having the conversation about build to rent and how all of the tools are literally packaged together for a turnkey investment, and all they're having to do, is provide their funds. The heads that were going this way initially are up and down at this point, because they are thinking about, after we did our part together to purchase the property or get it to sold or whatever it was, having to find the property management, having to deal with the tenant, having to now go in and maintain the property. And I literally had one of my investors tell me the other day, I'm just so tired. I just really want to focus on my business. The goal it was always to have diversified streams of income, to have different avenues. 90% of millionaires, wealthy individuals become someone in real estate. And so obviously, if you want to be wealthy, you have to be in real estate. Well, I don't know, but most often you have to be in real estate. So a lot of my investors are business owners who are looking for other ways to make money. Well, they're just really tired and they just want to focus on making their money in their businesses and saying at the end of the quarter or the end of the year when they're talking to their tax planner, hey, I need to deploy $150,000 or $250,000 in order to offset some of this income. And I want to be able to do that with a turnkey real estate business. That's why working with our team just makes it just.
Yeah, and we've been very stable for years. We have predictable data. Uh, it's not as big of a risk. And sometimes you get these characters who want to say, you know what, I want to put money in other places. Okay, like what? Like the stock market. Like, well, this, you buy a stock, it can absolutely go to zero. You buy a property, especially one that's brand new, it's not going to zero. So there's a lot of safety there. I also like looking at just what's happening across the board in real estate and being able to compare and contrast what's happening there. And so my article is actually about what's happening on the bank and lending side of things. We talked about kind of the issues that happened in the past from a lending perspective, and now we're hearing the trend of zombie banks. And so whenever I hear a headline like this, zombie banks, I always I'm willing to listen, but I know there are a lot of things that are kind of the hot thing to say, but I always want to pan out to see if they're true or not. So for example, for a while, we heard a lot about zombie companies, right? And so Airbnb was one of them, YouTube was one of them, Uber was one of them, these companies that weren't profitable. And they were zombies for a period of time, but then they eventually became profitable and now are no longer on that list. Some zombie companies did eventually go under, WeWork and others. So there is, you gotta watch the trend and see how it plays out. So as we're watching the trend of zombie banks, and these are a lot that banks that invested in commercial professional companies, buildings. And as we know, we've seen an exiting of a lot of major cities. We've seen a lot of the work from home trend. And then the other part that doesn't often get mentioned is just interest rates and the way that they changed. So on the residential side, if you're buying 1 through 4, you would typically buy a property using a 30-year fixed mortgage. Well, on the commercial lending side, the structure is actually shortened quite a bit. So it's very common to have a 3-year and then an ARM, a 3-year fixed rate and then an ARM, or the loan itself is just for 10 years and that's it. And it's always assumed that you're going to go ahead and get a refinance anyway. That's part of the way that loan is structured. And so we're now at a point where a lot of those commercial properties are now due for refinancing. So they may have had a loan that was at 3, 4, 5%, and now they're having to refinance an environment where 7 and 8% are the norm. And we actually have about $2 trillion worth of bank loans that are due in next year, 2015. So that's the headwind. So they were watching the Fed reporting to see what their actions is. From the last meeting, they decided to make no action. The prevailing thought process is that we'll see 2 quarterly rate reductions at some point this year, but no one knows when. And the short answer is that relief doesn't seem to be happening quick enough. And so we're already starting to see certain properties being sold at 30 or even up to 60% below their last resale value. Now, part of this is twofold. One, people overpaid for property that was never worth that much. A lot of it has to do with just projecting really high occupancy and rental rates. The other part of it is just genuinely it's hard to refinance in this market. And so we're seeing a lot of these banks kind of get stuck in having to figure out what they're going to do. They're called zombie banks because they're supported by the Fed. So otherwise they would have died without the Fed support. And so we've seen this before. It's possible that the Fed helps them long enough so that they can pass through this time period and they don't die. I doubt strongly that we're going to see a huge collapse to the actual lenders themselves. But a lot of these investors that bought into these larger projects are definitely going to take a haircut. That's already taken place, and I foresee it happening for at least another year to come.
Yeah, it's interesting because I can remember when I first got into real estate, which was the real estate sales side of it. I've been in real estate since 2010, but as an actual licensed real estate agent, there was all this push about, oh, you need to be in commercial real estate. You need to be in commercial real estate. And I remember thinking that usually comes from people who are a lot more seasoned than I am, have been around for a long time. And I remember thinking, as someone who created the first social media marketing campaign for a company, how are they going to survive when all of this goes remote? Now, granted, I didn't see COVID come in, and I thought that this was going to be 20, 25 years down the line, but in 2020, 2021, 2022, when a lot of those companies started to say, well, I guess people can't work from I guess they don't need to be in the office. And also we have to raise our wages. So we have to find a way to cut these costs. And so everybody's going remote. I remember thinking, oh, it's going to start a lot sooner than I expected, but I can remember a time where it was seen to be the more kind of prestigious investment, to be in commercial real estate. And now we're seeing how just technology in a sense can really shake all of those things up. And it's going to affect all of us, even down to I know the article talks about, how some of the larger banks have the reserves to be able to sustain the changes and things like that. But some of the smaller banks won't. And I know that I've seen that even in my own hometown, where credit unions and small banks that have been there for years now have different names. And a lot of them are being overtaken by what used to be online banks or those online lending institutions. And they're buying these banks because they're not being able to survive, not being able to produce those loans if it was a large factor for them. And for somewhere like a small town, where a lot of your commercial lending is coming from local businesses, if those businesses didn't survive, then neither can you. So I do think that is quite interesting. And while some of the larger banks may not go under, some of the smaller banks are going to be affected. And that's typically the people who are going to lend to the people who are looking to develop, or the small town or first time investor. The good thing about it is that thankfully, we have the ability to provide inventory for investors who are still looking for places to deploy capital. So maybe you're not looking for a single family investment, or maybe you're not a first time investor. Well, then maybe a duplex or a quadplex is probably a better investment for you. Still the same investment. You have better loan terms because now you're financing it over 30 years or so, typically going to have lower interest rates, and it's just a more stable investment.
And we hear it, and I know I hear it a lot, because this is something I track coming from the kind of executive commercial side of things, where oh, Tim, this is about commercial. I'm in residential. This doesn't impact me, and it's just market instability absolutely impacts you. The reality is that if there's an increase in commercial foreclosures, that is going to find a way to impact your ability to grow your investment portfolio. And it's very important, for us, we're obviously tracking it, but, we need to be aware. When I think, someone's out there devising $1 billion idea right now on how to repurpose all of this empty office space, and more power to them, because, I don't know what you do with it, but, just like Jasmine said, remote work, is here to stay. And then also you're seeing it across industry right now of just lower overall headcount. When you think about, even with hybrid, it's total days in office is just plummeting right now, because it's not just, okay, well, I work remote 3 days a week. Yeah, but there's also fewer of you that are in the office those other 2 days a week. So, now instead of needing, 50 cubes on my floor, I need 10. I need 10 cubes. I need space for 10 cubes and, no bathroom and one little kitchenette, and I'm good to go. And that's prevalent across industry. So the ability or the likelihood of instability or, just general tightening of lending from these institutions that, maybe we're a little more, free to lend, that's going to become a challenge for so many people. So, again, it just goes back to those strong foundational fundamentals, having those in place as an investor, so that even as things tighten, you still have the ability to navigate underwriting, and you've got a great deal in hand, which gives the bank confidence to lend to you.
And you know what? The great thing about these changes is that remote work means that there's going to be a lot of stability for residential investors, which is who we work with. And so I actually had a conversation just yesterday with one of the agents that I've been working with, kind of like helping and training. And I remember saying to her, I can remember having a conversation with a couple of my loved ones about transitioning from working in the office to working from home. And the amount that it would take to get a qualified and a quality employee to come into the office It's just not something companies are willing to pay at this point. And we actually monetized it. The situation was I had a family member who had gotten a remote position, a lot less stress. She rolls out, from their, rolls out in their pajamas and goes to work for their meetings, or maybe put on a business shirt, as opposed to having to get dressed, drive to a commercial building, find a parking spot, go inside, and sit down. And they were offering $5,000 more. It's just like, it just doesn't work, And for me, I was like, if I really had to think about it, someone would literally have to offer me $2,000 to $3,000 more a month in order to get me to go to an office and work somewhere every day, right? And I think that people are realizing that not only are they saving time, but they're also saving money, which means that people are prioritizing really wanting to love where they live. So when you have a renter that's going somewhere, they're working remotely, they want to live somewhere that they're going to be comfortable, where they have space, where they have some nice finishes, where they have a nice environment. And that's the type of inventory that we provide. So when we're talking to our investors about the areas, maybe they're the areas that we're in is a new area for them. I think it's funny when we get the question, well, who are the major employers around? What are the major companies over there? It's like, we're in California because everybody's working remotely, and now people who used to spend an extra $400 or $500 on gas or on work clothes or whatever it is, are more comfortable spending it on their rent, which means that our investors also get premium rent. So it works out for everybody.
Yeah, and to tie it up with Tim's article, it means that the secondary market is going to perform better. It means that people are going to choose more higher quality of life. It means people don't need to be tied to the city center as much. They care more about where they live, where they raise a family, what their average typical day looks like. And so like in New Jersey, it was normal to commute an hour and a half to get into the city and actually get into the office. A lot of those people, once that's no longer necessary, they don't have to be in New Jersey anymore, right? That's not where the economic activity takes place. And you can now, you have the whole country open up to you, and which you're going to pick, what the area that's better for your kids, better for your family, better for your quality of life.
When I think about the investor that comes to me and says, hey, I want to invest in, a duplex in Miami, right? That's a vanity. That's for vanity. I mean, you want to tell your friends that you have a property in Miami. Hopefully they don't ask you if it's making money, because then you're going to be like, I don't know. But I'd much rather say, you want to look in Orlando, let's look in Ocala. And then at the end of the day, you're like, hey, we've got 5 properties. Oh, where are they? It doesn't matter. There are 5 cash flowing properties. That's what matters. The business foundation, the profit, the actual execution of the business is what matters, versus here's the zip code that my property's in. And so it's just about shifting that mindset a little bit. And a lot of times we'll get those of like, hey, I really want to find something in Orlando. I want to be right by Disney. Okay, cool. Let's run a financial scenario here. Oh, wait, you want to make money? Cool. Here's some options that are actually going to do that for you. And that's really what matters in running your personal investment kind of business.
Yeah. Well, with that said, thank you guys for your time. Tim and Jasmine's information will be in the link below. Please reach out to them directly if you have any more questions. They'll be more than happy to assist. And without further ado, thank you and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, guys.